Howdy, all you delicious people! I'm here to review a Vampire Hunter D from 1985. So, we've come across a movie that I think the biggest selling point is its visuals. That it says vampire, but it goes on and does other things. It goes on to give us a brief werewolf, it gives us a ghost jaguar for reasons. It goes on to give us a dinosaur, which is kind of strange in the beginning piece here. And whether it is a dinosaur, not quite sure. That could be left up to your interpretation. We have golems in this piece. We have mutants and demons and all kinds of things. It's kind of a nice variety and barrage. And so that could sell you on this hour and 16-minute movie, if nothing else. But then once you honestly get past that, Vampire Hunter D also has quite a bit of moments within it where it's people either walking, hard running, or going on and riding off in the sunset for too long of an obscure amount of time, which makes no sense to me. We have a movie that is supposed to explain something about its world, and after an hour and change, I feel to go on and still be having more questions than answers about this specific world. To just be like, well, is Bloodlust gonna go on and answer more of those questions than what this did? Does this movie just have to just be what it is and I just have to be satisfied by that? Why is it that this character is to go on and have his left hand talk to him? We may never know. Why is it that this character is to be uber powerful? I guess because he has somehow connected to Dracula. What is that connection? Not quite sure. So, that is a way of which that they just kind of leave things to be seemingly under your interpretation of this character, and that is to just be like, I'm sorry, like, so you don't really want to go on and explain nothing. You just want to put out this unique and interesting adventure that eventually is to be very simply put, but also is to have so much that it can easily get compared to, that eventually it really does not come off as anywhere unique. And if you go on and want to look at those things compared to, a lot of them are honestly so much better in quality as well as also story. And really, that does go on and have an issue when I'm going to need to recommend this to you or not. But then again, I have not seen Bloodlust. So, with that said, of course, the obvious comparisons are as easily followed to be Hugh Jackman's Van Helsing, the anime of Helsing and Helsing Ultimate that seems way too similar to this project. I would go on and also throw in, because of knowledge, of a comic book character turned movie called Solomon Kane that is actually pretty similar and actually has really cool visuals within that film, surprisingly. And also, I could throw in video games like Darkwatch, which was to be a rather fascinating bit of game to play. As well as also talking about a game that eventually went to be a show called Castlevania. Very similar. So, really going on and giving you the cliff notes of what is to be this film, which is really just basically explaining the movie for how shallow and how much runtime this thing really has, of an hour and 16 minutes. We come across a character named Doris. Doris is to go on and be hunting one night, and eventually she goes on to realize that she's not alone out there, that eventually she is to be attacked by a noble vampire. Immediately when you say noble and vampire together, noble means nothing to me. If you would have said ancient, if you would have said old, like if you like, then I could be like, oh, okay, all right. Like when you throw out the word noble, I'm like, someone would really have to go on and know about vampires or know that noble actually is to be a thing to give a about. But to the common man, like nobody really knows what noble means, and why should I care? But so we would have Doris that gets attacked by this noble vampire, and that's a stupid no. I just want to goofily pronounce it because it doesn't make any sense. She gets bitten. She conveniently makes her way into some road that is to have a vampire hunter who is D, and is to try to task him with a challenge. And then when it seems D is to be very much skilled, she's like, okay, I'll go on and I'll hire you, without this guy really talking a lick about him being a hunter or anything. But it seems that this girl just knows a thing or two about hunters, because she at one point has had a father that is to have been a hunter himself. So Doris goes on and has a contract with D, and eventually she mentions about how, yeah, I'll go on and I'll give you 3 square meals, and you can take whatever you want from me also. You can take my body. Huh? Yeah, she has to throw her head to the side, and she has to do that to explain to you how much of an innocent that she is, that she's willing to have whatever it takes for this guy to go on and be driven to become this guy who takes down this noble to free Doris from this vampirism, which not quite sure if that's exactly how things work as far as being vampire. But it seems in this story it may go on that way. I am to just go on like, meh, like once you've become a vampire, like you're just kind of effed. But so we go on to have D, that eventually is to go along with Doris to a town that eventually finds out what she is, and is to treat her poorly, trying to send her off to this camp that people haven't gone to for 50 years. And the last person who was sent there had been driven, crazed, and killed. And so Doris goes into town, tries to, at a general goods store, buy up some things, and they're unwilling to sell them to her. And D is telling Dan, Doris's brother, this really young lad, which makes no sense for him to kind of buck up right now. But regardless, Dan is to be told, encourage your sister. Don't cry in front of her. Just go on and try to support your sister right now because she needs it more so than ever. So Dee eventually goes on with Doris back at her farm, and eventually is to realize that there is to be a blood moon. which immediately when I hear the word Blood Moon, I immediately think of 7 Days to Die. This video game I had played once, where every 7 days there'd be this blood moon, and that would be when all the zombies would be going crazy, and that would be the hardest night to try to live through. Most of the time, depending on the difficulty that you have. Or depending on how long you'd really be playing the game for. But anyways, with the Blood Moon for this movie, it is to go on and be that none of the supernatural entities go on and seemingly do anything on the Blood Moon, which is kind of strange. But so we would have Dee that is telling Doris, is like, well, hey, if anybody's going to come for you, it's going to be tonight. So Dee goes on and faces off against the threats against Doris. And eventually they realize, oh, this guy is a dhampir, whatever that's supposed to mean, because that is never really explained. As if we're supposed to know what a dhampir is, or whatever. I guess we should probably have Googled that or looked it up somewhere, right? Yeah, how are we supposed to know what this is? But then also, because that's how they just explain away this character, like we're supposed to know exactly what that means. So eventually we find out that Dee is a unique character, that eventually all the afflictions that are to be of vampires, eventually Dee is to not completely fall to the weakness of. We have Dee that kind of regrows back his arm. We have Dee that ends up getting a spike to the chest. We have Dee that is to face off against uberly powerful vampires like the Count, and is to eventually have the Count be like, what are you? And so, because eventually, when Dee kind of overpowers these characters, eventually they want him. They eventually want to go on and want to realize, yeah, this guy is a pretty credible threat, so let's go on and have him face off against the Count, so that way this whole thing will get resolved. As well as also the Count going on and kind of turning against his own people, which that kind of tells a lot about the Count. But here's also the weird part by the end of this story, is the Count wants to go on and he wants to marry Doris, which does not make sense to me, but I guess we just have to have a wedding at the end of this story, because of course we do. Because there is to be too many stories where we are to go on and just have the main bad guy who is to somehow fall in love with the female Esh-like character, even when within the story it doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense. It honestly just seems that the Count is using this woman and is to not have it be his long lost love, that as if this girl is to be very much similar to a woman that he had lost or something like that. No, it honestly just seems that the Count is marrying this woman because he has nothing better to do. He's like, well, I guess I'll just marry her. Like, I did go on and I bit her earlier in the film, so I guess I might as well just go on and just do a whole ceremony where I'm shelling out so much work and so much time to put this whole thing together for reasons I don't understand. And why not? Like, I just need to have just a big la-di-da event going on in my life because I have nothing better to do. Really, that's what this character is, to really connect with weddings within this project. As if he has probably also gone on and had so many other wives or women in his life that if anything, Doris is just like, well, this is just another uh, notch on my bedpost. Whatever. Which is kind of just stupid. So, this girl is a nothing to the count. He's just trying to count more women. Three women. Anyways, so we have a story that eventually has to be compared to by so many things. And when the further and further comparisons plop out, we start to find that there is so many bits of content that are actually more interesting than what this really is, in all honesty. With the exclusion of me being very unsure about Bloodlust. But anyways, let's talk about those comparisons. So first off, we have the obvious elephant in the room comparison, which is to be the Hugh Jackman Van Helsing film. We then go on and we have the comic book character turned movie, which is Solomon Kane. We also would have a video game called Darkwatch. Speaking of video game, we have a video game turned show called Castlevania. That is, I believe, a Netflix show, or was a Netflix show. Either way, it was done by Netflix originally. Then I would also talk about another show that's to be an anime called Hellsing or Hellsing Ultimate. Honestly, when you look at Alucard and you look at D, very much, except for a color scheme, the same character with severely straight up the same story. And we honestly have Hellsing or Hellsing Ultimate that, besides its Nazi thing within it, is to actually be a lot better in its approach. And goes on to explain fairly early in its show how Alucard is going to be this for the try to find a vampire weakness to be determined of like, yeah, this guy isn't going to be beaten so easily. Or eventually within this movie, we throughout it eventually get to that point somewhere within here. But anyways, so I don't want to call Vampire Hunter D bad, but if anything, that's the only thing that I'm honestly left with saying about this piece compared to so many things that are just clearly better than it. I would say that this movie has quite a bit of potential with its kind of Mad Max Wild West kind of a feel, but again, there are way too many things that are just clearly better than this project. And eventually, if they really thought this thing through and took the time allotted to really put out a project that was to be seemingly better story-wise than that matches visuals, then we'd have a whole different ball game of feeling upon this project. But with that said, here is where we are. So, with that said, I think it's about that time to just push into the full-on explanation and story for scene, blow for blow, the things of which that I did not go on, and talk about in the early stages of here. We also come to find that they end up kind of introducing characters just to reintroduce them later, as if there's some kind of weird quota that it's like, hey man, this Greco character that we created earlier here, we need to use him somewhere else later on in the piece because we just have to. We have this doctor that it's like, man, we could really use him somewhere more within the story because he's to be this surrogate father-like character. But then eventually we find out what happens to him, and But anyways, we don't try to kill too many monsters and mutants and what have you, because eventually we have to reuse them later for them to finally get defeated later on. I'm sorry, you could go on and create more monsters. You have that whole just straight up hallway or whatever that is, just chock-a-block full of just more monsters that you can just use at your ever whim. But you can't just go on and slice and dice and murder and kill through all of them, because it would just be like, well, then what are we going to have left to use? Just come up with something randomly, because does it really matter? Not really. So, I don't know, I guess that's just another issue I have. But so anyways, and also, what did you do with that werewolf? You could have really done something with that. But oh well, it's just a missed opportunity. So, with that said, I think it's about that time to just go into full-on spoiler breakdown. So, I wanted to wait to do this review when I was actually fully awake instead of half. That's why I was trying to do this yesterday, but it just didn't come off as well as I wanted it to. So that's why I'm trying to redo this here now. So I apologize for that inconvenience of just kind of slowing things down, because I'm just trying to get this at my best quality level to deliver you. So my apologies. So with that said, I think it's about that time to just pause this here, get out my character list or whatever is to be cliff notingly a thing that I need to go on and talk about here. So with that said, let's go on and pause the video, and let's do that, hoping that we can get this video done in a very quick pace and get it uploaded. So eventually people can go on and hopefully check this out. And thank you for everybody going on and listening to this, because I do appreciate it. So with that said, let's go on pause here. Let's get this covered. Alright, so in the beginning piece of this film, we have a text that goes on to say how this is a distant future, and how mutants and demons slither through a darkened world of darkness. And alright, that really doesn't go on and explain much. Could it be more vague? But either way, the opening of this movie is to be in a jungle or a forest of some kind. We have Doris that goes on and eventually notices a dinosaur-looking creature in the background that is nibbling on a tree, trying to get some apple or some kind of fruit of some kind, or eventually is to be just chomping down at this tree. So, Doris, ever the hunter character, goes on and eventually tries to put these blue lights to shine upon this monstrous being, and then goes on to start firing upon it with her hunting rifle. Eventually, the monster does do its own attacks. Doris dodges it, and then eventually, the further and further that Doris starts firing upon this creature, eventually the creature starts to move, starts to try to avoid Doris, and so Doris has to run herself to try to catch up with it. Eventually realizing she can't, she calls out for her horse, Luke. Luke will realize is to not have a very long shelf life, this horse character. So, Doris goes on and jumps upon Luke, and after a number of bit of firing here, we seem to have the Demosaur, I don't know what this is, this creature, fall to the ground, assuming or assessing that it's supposedly dead. Doris goes on, dismounts off her horse to get ever so closer to the creature, and then we find out that the creature is not dead. The creature goes on and thrusts its mouth onto the horse, having it fall down via some bite of some sort. Doris then goes on and whips out her whip or lasso, whichever this really is. I'm probably going to say whip because to me that is to what is to make the most sense. Because it looks more like a rope, it looks more like a whip than a lasso, like a rope. So let's go with just that. So as this whip goes on and is to eventually wrap around the neck of this creature, eventually the creature will free from the horse and eventually be fired upon and lose its neck from rest of body, killing it for certain. After Doris has finally gone on to put enough firepower in this thing, eventually Doris turns her attention to her seemingly dying horse, to eventually find that sadly Luke here is to get a mouthful of werewolf, as we are to go on and see that this werewolf is to be chomping down at this horse, blood spewing everywhere. Doris then goes on and averts her attention to this werewolf, and the werewolf goes on and is to desperately want to just quickly remove the cross, the necklace that is to be upon Doris's chest. Not to really do much of anything else, just let's remove that necklace. I'm sorry, Doris, but you just don't have a really good fashion bit of sense. Like, you just need to lose that necklace. Yoink. So, the necklace goes upon the air and kind of just fizzles and falls apart. So, shortly thereafter that, Doris is to be face to face with a noble vampire that is to go on and just consistently just stand there, stare at this girl for a long-winded amount of time, his eyes glowing red, and eventually Doris is like, oh, I guess this is the noble. All right, well, I'll just get out my hunting rifle and just see if yeah, that's not going to work. So, eventually the Nobel whips out his fangs and nibbles on a bit of Doris here. So, in all honesty, for the visuals of Doris, they are kind of inconsistent, but that also feels like a nitpick. And I'm sure there's probably a number of different artists that are to be working on this project, so that's probably the inconsistency there. There is at some point where I want to go on and guess the age of Doris because it seems to kind of fluctuate. But either way, we at some points get to see the skin of her. We get to see at some points where her shirt is to be ripped and we see a bit of her chesty. Or we go on and see her in a shower. We see the snake woman. They're in the buff. They're in the nude. So we get to see a bit of that. So we get the title screen of what is to tell us that this is Vampire Hunter D if we didn't know. We weren't sure. So the next thing we see is a kind of rocky bit of land that has skyscrapers that have been completely destroyed and annihilated within it, which was actually a pretty cool visual to really tell us that this is a distant future. So, the next thing we see is D. We see the vampire hunter. He is on his cyborg horse, because he can't just have a normal one. He has to have a cyborg horse. and is going on to be clucking upon this road to eventually meet up with good old Doris, because who else is in this movie? So Doris goes on and is to figure out quite quickly that this man is to be none other than a hunter. So she has to go on and challenge this man, and only a way of which that she can go on and do so. So Doris goes on to get out her whip, because she has to just crack the whip here, and goes on and takes her whip and does it in a manner that is to try and strike Dee. Dee quickly just is to go on and just dodge the attack, to be like, like what an inconvenience. And so Doris is like, oh, well, it does seem that you are quite skilled, but if anything, I really have to go on, and I really have to much more challenge you now. So the whip comes out yet again, and then all of a sudden, at the very end of the whip separates into multiple things of rope like things at the end there to tether off. And eventually, this is to be thrusted upon Dee's neck, Dee's arms, and eventually, Dee quite easily frees himself from all this, and then just starts to cluck on. And so Dee is to be like, oh, okay, well, it seems that since you are to go on and be much more of a skilled hunter than I thought you were, I should go on and want to hire you. I'll give you 3 square meals a day, and I'll give you my body. Oh no, my body. So, but if anything, Doris is to further explain what had happened to her by taking down the ribbon from her neck, revealing that she has puncture wounds upon her neck, to state that she was to have been bitten by a noble. And then that's what finally goes on and wakens up this Dee character from his not give a slumber of his day-to-day life. And Dee goes on like, wait a minute, what's your name? What? Who? What now? You were attacked by what? A noble, you say? Ooh, all right. Well, this seems like a challenging case. I think I will go on and I think I will help you. So, Dee then goes on to make his way with Doris, because we have to have so many D's here. We also have Doris's brother, who's Dan. Any other... And also, to make a good joke, probably a stupid one, but whatever. So, Doris really needed the D. She really needed that D. She desperately is like, man, that D. Oh, I need it. I desperately need it. I'll go on and sacrifice my body for it. Yeah. Stupid. Anyways, so Doris and Dee make their way to this farm. And so Dan, Doris's brother, is trying to protect these rams or these goats or whatever these animals are from this weird red cloud that seems to be attacking it. Not quite sure what exactly this cloud is. It seems that within the cloud we find out when Dee attacks it and kills it, there's like these meat sacks that come from it, but it's just so strange. But I thought it was kind of a cool visual also. So Dan tries to protect this ram from this cloud to eventually just have the ram get killed anyway. So Dan is like, oh, okay, well, like, too bad. So, but then eventually Dan sees Doris like, hey, sis! And Doris is like, well, hey, Dan, whoever you are. Whoever you are. It's their brother and sister. So, Dan goes on and meets with Dee, and then the two of them become fast friends, strangely. So, Dan goes on and looks at Dee's horse and is like, oh, you have this very specific model of cyborg horse. Like we're supposed to really give a shit. So, Dan eventually goes on to talk to Dee. It's like, you know what? It seems like you're a certain kind of guy. because of how quiet you are. Dan goes on to say, well, you must be the quiet type because you've seen so many horrible things in your life. And I hope that's the real guy that you are, instead of a guy who has done horrible things in their life. I hope that first one is to be you. Please let it be you. Don't be an axe murderer. But anyways, but Dan thinks that V for Vendetta, yeah, that D is also really cool. So we end up seeing some scenery shots, and then we cut to Doris by this horse and carriage making their way into the town with Dan and D. So Doris at one point stops her horse and carriage to eventually speak to a Greco guy, a douche, that basically is to go on and be as douchey as he is, because he is to, of course, have his father be the mayor of this town. And so Greco is to go in and ask Doris, hey, I've had a rumor going on around town that you are to be a vampire. Is that true? Doris and Greco go off to a dark alley for them to talk more. And Greco goes on to eventually be throwing himself at Doris and say that, hey, I can go on and protect you. Don't you know who my father is, the mayor? Because I have to explain this as if someone in the audience is to need to know this bit of information and it doesn't come off as natural. But hey, it's for the movie, not for logic here. So Greco goes on to further and further want to kiss this woman or touch her inappropriately. And Doris becomes more annoyed about that, slapping this guy's face, going on and cracking out the whip, and eventually just saying that she will not go on and need his help because she had already acquired this hunter character. So eventually I'm like, good for her. Yeah, all right. Like, she's not just throwing her body around. So I appreciate Doris for that, at least. So, as well as also, maybe Doris is trying to find someone very special. That special somebody. And eventually, Doris is to go on and be somehow very attracted to D, the quiet, also possibly murderous character that she is just so aroused by for some estranged reason. But so, let's cut to the quick here. So, since Greco is to have gone on and had his advances not be met by Doris, he goes on and he outs her in front of the whole entire town. That is like, hey, this woman, she's a vampire. Huh. So that immediately has Doris be forced to make her way to this town-esh-like meeting with the sheriff, the mayor, and the Dr. Faringo, I believe is how his name is pronounced. I'm not quite sure. And we have Greco that is going on and talking to his father, the mayor, and just kind of upset about how Doris had treated him. And the mayor is just like, go away. Like, I'm sorry, Greco, you're stupid. Just get out of my face. So, Greco leaves, and so since finding out that Doris is to possibly be this vampire, they immediately are to go on and think, well, we have to ship her off to this camp, this place that people are to be quarantined off. And Dr. Faringo is like, well, yeah, like the last time we sent somebody there was like 50 years ago, so I don't think we're going to be doing that right now. It doesn't seem quite safe. It doesn't seem to be the best solution. Doris goes on to state, hey, I have hired a hunter to take out this noble vampire, so if in case this character fails at his mission, then I will go on and I will do myself in. That is to be very vague, but if anything, I'm doing that for purposes. So, it seems that the town comes to agreement to that assessment, And so we then push on here. We have Doris that makes her way into a general goods store asking for a bit of meat and some fertilizer, and eventually Dr. Wateley, or something of that pronunciation, is to refuse servicing her. And I mean servicing her. And eventually, Doris and the doctor that goes along with her is to be like, well, why? Because we found out that you're a vampire. So everything is to be sold out for you and just you alone. So we now cut to Dee. Dee is going on at the horse and buggy and seeing that Dan is crying like a little bitch. He is crying like a little young lad would probably do in this situation because of stress, because of realizing that his sister is possibly a monster. And so Dee goes on and tells Dan to, you know what, buck up. Buck up, you young lad. Not exactly in those words, but if anything, Dee goes on and tells Dan, hey, when you're alone, you can cry however much you want. But when you're in front of your sister, go on and try to encourage her. Try to be positive. Try to be good to her, because if anything, she needs it now more than ever. And so Dan is to stop his tears and like, you know what, he's right. So, and Dee is like, you know what, Dan, I know it's hard, but your sister needs this right now for us, so we need to be that for her. So now we cut back to the farm, where there seems to be some defensive measures being put in place, some crosses, some electric fences, and eventually there's to be this weird, goofy eyeball of a thing making its way to the fence, and then it gets electrified. So Doris is to then go on and kind of make her way to Dan's bed and put a sheet over him, and then make her way down to Dee. Dee comes to find on a rack that there is this really long blade, and unracks this blade, and then is to talk to his left hand, which is kind of strange. So his left hand goes on and speaks to him, and eventually is like, yeah, it seems that you're acting quite unlike yourself. Man, this girl, like, there's something about her to you. And why then would you not go on and take advantage of this situation, because she's willing to give her body up to you, but you're not going to go on, and you're not going to do anything about that now, are you? Because of who you are. Like, you can go on and you can get some of that. You can get a piece of that, but no, you're not going to go on and you're not going to do that, because that's you. That's how different you are now. How dare you? So, if anything, we also have Dee's left hand that eventually will more and more say that all of this is to be a trap, and that they're probably going to be killed while doing this whole endeavor. But eventually, let's kind of cut to the more quick here. So, or also, the left hand is to say how Dee is used to being thrusted into blood, and eventually that's more where his life is going to lead. So, Doris makes her way down to Dee, and eventually is to explain or say to Dee, it's like, you have talked to my brother, haven't you? I could tell. Like, he's acting different. And so, Doris goes down and is to mention about how her father was a werewolf hunter. I wish we could have gone on and seen more werewolves in this project, but we didn't. We could have had a flashback moment where we could have seen more werewolves. Oh well. like, I always want to go on and I always want to see a werewolf project anyways, but oh well, that's just too bad. I went into a vampire hunter movie hoping I'd see more werewolves. Isn't that kind of dumb? If anyways, let's move on. So Doris goes on and says because her father was a werewolf hunter, she knows the signs of a hunter. And so shortly thereafter that, Dee goes on and explains the knowledge of which he has to Doris. So here's where Dee goes on and explains about the blood moon and how the blood moon does not go on and have the freaks come out at night. So if anything, if anybody is going to go on and going to try to come after Doris, it'll actually be tonight of all things. So if anything, just kind of get ready. Doris even goes on to want to help Dee, but Dee is like, yeah, no, you're not going to go on and help me. Like, I'm going to do this all on my own. So we have to assess that this Count character is to be between 5,000 and 10,000 years supposedly old. And really that is to probably assess how powerful this being really is. So really we could have gone on and assessed anything. Like yeah, like there is no real best understanding of how a vampire can really and truly powerfully actually be. Like if anything, he could just be like one of the very few vampires, so of course he has to be the most powerful just because he exists where so many others don't. So if anything, uh plus also they do say that Dracula is to exist. So if anything, like why does there have to be some kind of weird um kind of thing of power with these characters which I don't quite make sense of? Or it's like, why is it that one vampire is so much more powerful over the others? Why can't they all have the same power set? Especially if they are to go on and share blood between one another, because they kind of do, because they're bitten. Shouldn't that have exchanged the same amount of power? Whatever. Or powers? Anyways, so there is to be a rumbling in the woods that eventually leads Dee to get his hat and get ready for there to be combat. So we have, I believe, a werewolf, or we have both Ray and Larmika, I believe is the character's name. I'm probably gonna have to relook that up here briefly. Larmika. When I was going on and trying to execute this review before, I would consistently butcher this name or not remember it. So my apologies for every single time when I have to talk about this character, I'm going to poorly remember this name. So, but if anything, most of the time, Ray is more of the focus than Larmika is anyways. It's just true. So, I don't even know why they even really needed Larmika within this project. It just does not matter why she's here. If anything, Ray does the heavy lifting anyways. So, speaking of Ray, he gets out his boomerang-like weapon and throws it to eventually crush a lot of crosses here. And then eventually, we have Dee coming out of the farm to where Larmika's like, oh, Doris had hired a bodyguard, huh? Well, like, let's see how low that or how much of a quality of a person that Doris has hired. So we would have Dee that is kind of upset that a woman of all things would be coming after him or Doris, going on to be like, well, hey, where is the Count? I want to go on and I want to talk to the Count. If anything, you guys should probably go on after I defeat you and send a message to the Count, because that's all I care about. That's all Dee really cares about. And eventually, the two of them are kind of insulted by the fact that this guy is treating them like nothing. So, eventually, we have Ray that faces off against Dee, and we find that Dee, when facing off against Ray, realizes that this guy is to be none other than a mutant. He has this warping ability to take a sword that is to be stabbed into him and have it not hit Ray's body and instead hit his enemy in the back. And so Dee goes on and realizes that Ray is quite skilled, and that's not going to stop Dee whatsoever. Eventually, as they further stab into Dee, they realize that he quickly heals, and they realize that also his clothes heal. And they realize that this guy is a Dhampir. Oh. So, this guy is to go on and be quite skilled and powerful. So, if anything, Dee is to tell the two the mutant and vampire, it's like, hey, I don't want to kill you. Just go on and send a message to the Count. Which, again, these people grow insulted by that. And so Larmika has this kind of weird, strange disc attack that she thrusts out. And eventually this disc explodes. And while both Doris and while both Dan are sleeping here, we end up getting the Count that is to be finding out about how both Ray and both Larmika had both lost, and they had faced off against the Dhampir. And so it's like, okay, alright, so the Count is to realize kind of who he's messing with. So Larmika and Ray make their way back to the castle in defeat, and eventually, as the two of them are talking, Ray wants to eventually become an immortal and become an equal to Larmika, and Larmika will have nothing of it, because eventually Larmika doesn't really want anybody to just be a vampire at this point. When eventually Doris is to possibly become a vampire herself and her future stepmother, Larmika is like, yeah, I don't really like that this girl is going to go on and become my stepmother. I don't like this. So if anything, I'm going to try to figure out a way to stop her father for this to go on and actually happen. So Larmika goes on and slaps Ray, and eventually he has blood dribbling off of his face, of which that he licks. So Dee himself, by the break of day, I believe, goes on to try to find the Count's castle, because this guy just has endless amount of adrenaline, it seems, or stamina. This guy doesn't really need to sleep, it seems. So Dee goes on and finds the bridge of this castle up. So he goes on and he jumps to eventually jump over this bridge and then goes just swooping down. Eventually to go on and make his way to this hallway that is to have chock-a-block full of all these monstrous beings, of which that Dee goes on and turns on this flashlight of sorts that is to be a weakness to these monsters, and then further goes on and walks through this hallway, eventually needing to kill every once in a while. But Dee goes face to face with a character called Gimlet, who is to have these Wolverine like claws coming from its legs and foot. Not three of them like Wolverine, but a whole one that comes from one of each hand and one of each leg. Kind of more like X-23, that Wolverine character, or maybe even Daken, Wolverine's son. So Dee takes out his blade to face off against Gimlet, and then shortly thereafter, we then have Dee that is face to face with a massive golem. Eventually, this golem is to have this charcoal like piece of rock in its hand that we come to find is some kind of explosive. The golem chucks the explosive, and Dee dodges out of the way to eventually have this thing explode near him, to where he uses his cape to cover himself up, so that way it protects him from this explosive device. Dee goes on after quickly avoiding this golem, makes his way past these double doors to go into this room full of statues, which immediately I'm like, well, here's a good opportunity to have a gargoyle, but instead we have this ghostly beast that is to be of a jaguar, which I scratch my head about. So I'm like, man, we could have had a chance to have gargoyles in here, but no, we have whatever this is instead. Whatever film, whatever. So that's just not how supernatural things work now, does it? I've never seen a statue turn into a ghost before. That's new to me. But anyways, and also insulting to you, the person who have made this project. I apologize, but I have to be brutally honest. So Dee whips out this dagger or this little knife and jabs his way into this ghostly cougar without any effect because it's a freaking ghost. The ghost goes on to eventually rip into Dee's arm and realizes that the only thing left for Dee to do is to destroy this wall that is nearby, hoping that the rubble will eventually kind of make a good amount of distance between both Dee and this ghostly jaguar. So, as Dee is to make quick work of this ghostly jaguar within the rubble, Dee then goes on and re-meets back up with Ray, who has this weird, goofy character that has this orange hair, of which that his character is not explained at all of who he is within the character list of things, so I have no idea of what this character actually is. If anything, I could probably write him off and say that this is just to be an old man, because if anything, there's not much that this character really does. There's some little bits of dialogue here. It doesn't matter. If anything, we're still focused on Ray. So Ray goes on to eventually talk to Dee here and be like, man, you really truly are a Dhampir. I think that I should go on and kind of guide you to the destination of the Count, and so I will make quick work of you now by going on and destroying the ground of which that you walk on, so that way you will go falling to hopefully what is to be your death. But in all honesty, not really, because we still have some time going in this film. So the ground falls from underneath Dee, and we have Dee that goes on to even use his own cape to try and save him from this falling, but eventually Ray is to use his boomerang to have that kind of be a thing that is to be stopped right away. Dee goes on and falls here and falls into this ruin. Eventually we have Dee's left hand is like, I told you this was a trap, I told you this. And Dee is like, yeah, if anything, let's keep going. So they go on and they have to explain how old these ruins are, and how we would go on and simply, when D is to be walking around, he steps on a thing that just turns into dust. And we have a number of skeletons that are all lined up all over the place. What are these skeletons? No idea. It doesn't really matter. Maybe um, the skeletons of the Count's dead wives. Don't know. Anyways, so because I remember Batman Forever, and then Alfred is going to mention to Grayson at one point, yeah, this is the room of Master Wayne's dead wives. Like, man, that's kind of weird and unsettling. Why does Bruce have a room for his dead wives? That's strange. So, if anything, what D is really here for, as he further and further makes his way through this ruin, is to eventually be met by these three women that all have these harps. All three of them are to have this light bluish and greenish bluish hair, and eventually we find out that they are completely naked. Eventually, these women all explain that they're all to be Medusas, and eventually every one of their eyes turn green, and their faces all turn into snakes, and then their bodies end up having their hands and legs disappear because they all turn into snakes themselves. They all start to wrap around D and eventually start to suffocate him and drain him of his energy and what have you, more as they wrap around him. So now we cut to Doris, who's speaking to Dr. Faringo, and eventually Faringo is to say that he's not much trusting of D, that there's something within the guy's eyes that just seems dangerous. So let's just get dangerous now, should we? So the next thing we see is the Golem and the Chula, which is to be this monster that has spiders coming from its back, as well as also the Gimlet and also Ray bashing through their way of Doris's home and grabbing on the Doctor, Dan, and Doris. Doris goes on to make a bargain with Ray, as she is to be grabbed by him. She pleads that if they free both Dan and the Doctor, that she will not go on and bite her own tongue and take her own life. Dan is to go on and be like, well, we came here for you anyways, so if anything, that seems like a good enough bargain. So we then cut to Doris being face to face with the Count. And eventually, after he goes on and mentions about how this girl will be ushered into nobility and be his countess soon. Eventually, the Count will also go on and display to Doris what has gone on to happen with D via on this seemingly screen next to her, where she is to be seeing that D is to now be suffocated by these snakes that are to be wrapping around him. So, Doris is to watch in horror that D may possibly go on and die. We have the Count that is to go on and say, yeah, these girls are going on and strangling D, and they are filling up with ecstasy because of how powerful this guy really is. And the Count is to say, yes, Doris, maybe you'll get aroused by all this imagery. But so anyways, we have the Count that is to tell Doris, like, I think this is a time for you to go on and sleep here. Because if anything, you need to rest up, because if anything, tomorrow night you will be wedded by me. So Doris goes on and gets kind of passed out here. And the next thing we see is Dee being surrounded by all these snake women. Again, strangled and suffocated and what have you. So the girls are all talking about how overwhelmed they are of the power of this guy. And Dee is to now have to go into extreme measures. Dee's eyes are starting to glow blue, and his skin is to start to turn to a bluish, purplish, colorish of things. So Dee goes on and has his fangs being whipped out and bites hard into one of the snake women, eventually having the snake woman cry out in agony. So now we have Larmika that is to look over the body of Doris as she sleeps, hoping that this woman is to not become her stepmother. So Dee goes on and eventually is to make quick work of the snake woman. He is to go on and tie them up and bloody them up and kill them all. And so, all very quickly trying to figure out how to go on and get rid of this scene and get out of this scene, and eventually realizing that we've already been an hour and 6 minutes here, and we're almost the good chunk of the distance close to the movie. So we have Dee that is to go on and find where Doris is. And even though Larmika is to be upset with Dee, there is not much that she can really do to stop him either, because of how powerful that Dee really is. Larmika tries to do this quick attack, which does nothing. Dee takes her out. Dee throws Doris over his shoulder and tries to get the heck out of the castle. Dee is to be met by Grimlet. Dee whips out his sword and tries to slice into Grimlet, and then eventually is to be met by not other than Chula, who starts to shuck all of these bugs coming from out of his chest. Dee has his left hand turn into a vacuum, consuming all these bugs and digesting them, realizing that Chula has kind of been neutralized here. And also, Dee cuts Chula in half and kills him, so we do kill him here. Dee thrusts his way through this ghostly, monstrous hallway that we had seen before, and slice and dices through it, and then is to be face to face again with the golem. Dee now has to go on and try to lower this bridge as quickly as possible, so he cuts the ropes that are tying to it slowly going down, so it will go down a lot faster. The golem is to find another explosive within his hand, and as Dee goes on and gets away from the bridge after cutting the golem's hand, the explosive does go off and destroy half of the golem. Dee then also goes on and stabs the golem through the mouth to go through the other end of this golem's head. Ray goes on and finds the golem seemingly killed, and so both the Grimlet and both Ray make their way into the forest to try and find where Dee is, but they end up getting a good distance of separation between both one another, both Ray and both Grimlet. Ray goes on and finds some forest sounds, so he just takes his boomerang and throws it into the woods, to eventually come to find that instead of him hitting Dee, he hits Grimlet and kills him, and we then have Ray that just needs to push on here. So, Doris is now back at her bed, fast asleep. Dan is to go on and say to Doris, hey, yeah, like, Dee is to go on and after all the things that he's gone on to do, like, this guy just doesn't sleep. he's going on into town to try to find a way to fix this wall that, of course, had been destroyed. Like, man, this guy like just has endless energy. So we now cut to Greco. Greco is in town having a bunch of women on his arm, and eventually he makes his way to this hotel or this area to ask if there is a monitor room. Because eventually he's going to go on and he is going to kind of sneak in and listen to this conversation that is going on between both Ray and this cloaked messenger that is to be giving Ray a very specific device that is to be this time uh, bewitching sensor device that is to go on and be a weakness to D, but then also a weakness to all vampires. So, and we would find that Ray is going to try to use this bewitching sensor also against the Count, which eventually will be a big mistake. So, we then have Dan that goes on and is to try to do some farming. All the while, Dan is to go on and notice this note that's on this cross. Both D and both Doris are to notice the cross and the note. And it says that D needs to go on and face these people of a language that only he can read. So, Doris is to ask D why is it that she was to not to have been chosen and go alone instead of him. And D is like, well, I am a Dhampir, so if anything, um, like this is the reason why I'm going on and going. So, blah blah blah. I have no idea what to say here, so I'm just saying that to figure out how to kind of get to the next point here. So D goes on and gets onto his cyborg horse and faces off against Ray. Ray, we come to find, is to have Dan with him. He had captured him. To go on and have Dan on this very high column of a thing that at the end of it has this big rock like boulder that has Dan on it and he's just dangling there is kind of crazy. Oh, crazy. So Ray faces off against D here and they get out their boomerang and their blades, and eventually that is to be all well and nullified. And eventually we then have Ray that takes out the sensor device and tries to use it against D. As Ray cannot go on and figure out how to use this device, D takes Ray's stupidity and takes advantage of it by cutting off Ray's hand and having the device go flying. And we have Doris that is on her couch hoping that D and Dan will be okay. As Doris makes her way to the circuit breaker, she is to be met by the doctor explaining how he had a sick patient in the village, but he wanted to come and make his way to Doris. The doctor goes on to explain about how there is a safe haven for Doris and the two of them should make their way there. So, after D cuts off Ray's hand, he then frees Dan, and the next thing we see is Doris and the doctor on horse and buggy. And eventually we have Larmika that appears in front of them, stopping the horse and buggy. As Doris gets her whip out, we have the doctor that is to tear away the whip from Doris and eventually also tear away the cross from Doris's chest to eventually also reveal a chesty from Doris. So, Cuskin. So the doctor is to reveal, yeah, I was a human until yesterday. So he's a monster. He had turned. He's a monstrous character now. Sadly enough. So we have Doris that's in horror because of how kind this guy ever was to her, but now he is to go on and be a demon monster. So the further the doctor is to talk to Doris and say, yeah, I should probably go on and have my way with Doris now, because there's nothing really stopping me. And Larmika is to kind of be insulted by this doctor. It's like, well, hey, you've gone on to have as much usefulness as I really need for you. So Larmika goes on and kills the doctor and thrusts him down this rocky mountain to eventually get killed. And the doctor and Doris have this moment between one another, like, oh no, he's gonna die. Oh, well, alright, well, he's a monster anyways. So Larmika and Doris have this heart to heart talk where eventually Larmika is to say, it's like, well, you know what? Like, all this is to be a real problem for my father. Like, he's the real problem here out of everything. So if the Count is to go on and just to be taken out, then, like, if anything, Larmika won't have any real problems here. All of a sudden, we have Greco that brings in the bewitching sensor device and it gets ever so much closer to Larmika. Larmika falls into the lap of Doris, and the more and more that Greco starts talking about he having this device now and he will protect Doris, and on and on and on he goes. Larmika is like, how about you just kill me instead of hearing you talk more? And the further that Greco continues to talk anyways, eventually there is to be this shoving that goes on to have Greco fall down this mountain, but not exactly get killed right away. Eventually he is to be met by Ray, and the Ray is like, oh, well, I'm going to go on and I'm going to kill you. So Doris and Larmika are to eventually be reunited with Dan and Dee. And so we have Larmika that goes on and talks about survival of the fittest and talks about who she is. And eventually they also talk about the sacred ancestor. Because Larmika at one point is to have a conversation with Dracula via his picture and hope that there is a way that Dracula will go on and assist them. And there is to again be an assessment that Dee is to be somehow connected to Dracula in some way. But that is not exactly revealed. We just have to look at the picture and be like, oh, yeah, there's something very much similar here. And so we make our way back to Dan, Doris, and Dee back on the farm. And so Doris is in the shower, and eventually she makes her way back to Dee. Eventually, within their conversation between the two of them, eventually at a certain point, Doris is to kind of throw herself at Dee, hoping that Doris will have Dee accept her and want to even take blood from her because he is technically a damn peer. The more and more tempted Dee is, the more that his eyes start to glow blue, and how also Dee's left hand is talking to him. Dee refuses to go on and take Doris's blood, and somewhat pushes her away and apologizes, and then goes under the couch to sleep. So next we have Dee that makes his way outside. Eventually he comes face to face with Ray, who is to have the time bewitching sensor device. And the two of them come head to head. Eventually Dee is to be spouting some weird stuff from out of his mouth and falls to the ground. And Ray is to go on and take this wooden spike and thrust into Dee's chest, assuming that that is to be a way to kill Dee, as well as also Ray, to even things out, is to take his boomerang and chop off Dee's hand to even the score. So now Dee is just on the ground, assumed dead. And we have both Dan and we have both Doris that are to be collected and are to be forced their way into this castle to try and either be wedded or Dan to try and survive by going through these tunnels and piping and tubing and whatever to try to find where his sister is. So now Dee is on the ground and his left hand is to make his way back to the rest of his body. Eventually coming to find that there seems to be some kind of snakes or red clouds that are also to make their way near Dee to eventually attack him. The left hand tries to eat a bit of dirt, trying to wake up Dee, hoping that he'll go on and he'll attack this red cloud the further close it gets to him. And conveniently Dee will wake up, will go on and attack this cloud, pushing us on to realize that Dee is still alive, strangely. So Larmika and the Count have this bit of dialogue between one another. And the Count is to realize that he cannot trust Larmika. So he goes on and he puts Larmika into this purple of cloud and then walks away from her, because he just overpowers her. Then the Count talks to Ray. Ray is hoping that the Count will fulfill the promise of becoming immortal and living forever. And the Count is to go on to yeah, no. How about another 50 years from now? Then we'll go on to decide whether or not you're going to be worthy of being an immortal and a vampire. And the Count walks off. Ray is another 50 years? How much damage that's going to do to my body? So here's, of course, where the the character Dan goes through the piping, and Doris, with a bunch of cloaked monsters, are making their way through the castle to eventually make their way to this wedding ceremony. Dan finds this pipe and is to notice the Count and goes flying to attack the Count. The Count figures out that Dan is behind him and thrusts him away, kind of psychically slaps him away. Dan goes flying and Ray grabs him and rescues him from his fall. We then, shortly thereafter that, have Ray go against the Count, eventually using this bewitching sensor device against the Count, and eventually the Count falls weakness to it, But then eventually also, the Count just destroys the device and then eventually goes on to use his psychic ability to have Ray go flying all over the place, eventually crushing his brain and killing him. So they are now at this wedding altar. There is a number of monsters all in these cloaks that are congratulating the Count on him getting married here. So as the Count is to go on and take out his fangs to eventually nibble more on Doris, there is all of a sudden a knife going into the Count's eye. Dee shows up. Eventually, there is to be a picture shown of Dracula, and we then would go on to have both Count and both Dee fighting here. We have Dee's sword going up against psychic powers, and eventually the Count is to psychically thrust Dee all over the place. He mops the floor with him. To the point of now Dee is up in the air, and so Count is like, you know what, I'm feeling a little bit creative. Like, I definitely won't go on and kill Dee in the same way that I just killed Ray. So if anything, I'll go on and I'll have Dee die by his own sword, as the Count uses his psychic ability to have the blade ever so much more go into Dee and try to dehead him. So Dee has his eyes glowing blue and his skin turn a bluish purple. And the Count is to realize, wow, this damn pier is to be way more powerful than I could have assessed. So the blade goes flying near the Count's chest, and the Count catches it. Eventually, we would have the Count that goes on and breaks a part of the blade and thrusts the blade shard into Dee's chest, but then also the rest of the blade goes into the Count's chest, and he is to get stuck onto this wall. The Count ends up doing one last thing of psychic power of trying to have Doris try and attack Dee, getting out this dagger to try and kill Dee with, but eventually we would have Dan that convinces Doris not to do this, to try to stop herself. And eventually Doris is to try and stop herself successfully. Lamika goes on and is to watch over her father and watch him die. Eventually looking at the picture of Dracula, realizing that again, both Dee and Dracula, because maybe that's what the whole D thing stands for. It maybe just stands for Dracula. And so we have Dee, Doris, and Dan. They all decide to make their way out of the castle, and when they go on and they ask Lormika what she's going to go on and do, she goes on to mention about how she's a pure noble. And so I think she ends up just kind of going down with the ship here. She really is the go on and be like, well, like I might as well just stay here. So Dee, Dan, and Doris make their way outside the castle and watch that the castle disappears. and falls to the ground. Eventually, all of a sudden, within the environment, the skies and the clouds start to change, and it's a very weird Ash-like approach. That it seems that the whole world has finally turned into some kind of normalcy, and is to have a lot more grass and more green land, and looks to be um, more better off for itself. So the ending of which that we see here is Dee getting back on his cyborg horse and riding off in the sunset with both Doris and both Dan going on and saying goodbye to Dee as he's leaving, and Doris says that she loves him. And Dan and Dee just continues on his cyborg horse, just riding off for a very long, extended amount of time. To where we're even going on and seeing like the brush of the weeds and all these it's stupid. But if anything, that wraps up this video. I'm gonna get out of here so I can go on and upload this today. Yeah. I was to hope to go on and really do this a lot quicker for an hour and 60-minute video, but that's just not what happened. So at least this is at least an hour and 30 minutes, at least. But it's probably longer than it is longer than the movie, but I don't care. If anything, it took me about 20 minutes to go into this, so like to recap it all and what have you. So if anything, you can watch this video however long you want to. You can not listen to this part of the video whatsoever. That's all your decision. So if anything, thank you for watching this. At least this video is not 2 hours long, so at least there's that for you. That at least it's just a smaller video. So, because I tend to do these things with the target of like, well, it's either going to be 2 hours or it's going to be 5 hours. Somewhere in there, it's going to be that huge chunk of length. And I redid this video kind of multiples of different times. So yeah. So that's to be the kind of the, like, I tried to do this in the best possible way I could. So here's this video. Thank you for watching. Thank you for going on and deciding to go into this content, because I do appreciate it. Hopefully I'll go on and I'll find something eventually more interesting than this at some point in the future. I have quite a bit of things that eventually are still in my kind of thing to eventually put out here. So I'm hoping that eventually any one of those will strike true interest to people, even if it's not this one. So I hope for the best. I'm going to get the heck out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.